So I'm going to preface this at the beginning by pointing out that we have had a podcast in the past. I think I've worked out we've known each other about 5 years, although that feels a really long time. But I'll preface this by saying that we have done a podcast before and we have talked extensively about some of the subjects we're going to cover here. We don't agree entirely on all of them, but the point of this isn't for me to give my opinion. The point of this is to kind of get your side of things and hear about your experiences and your opinions. So, Jess, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. Thank you so much for asking. How are you?
I'm loving life, honestly. It's a complete difference from my usual stay at home, have no friends, talk to nobody. So what I want to do is I want to start off, make sure everyone has a full introduction to who you are and sort of where you've come from with regards to modeling, influencing, and so on. So let's start off with how you became interested and started modeling.
So I started modeling sort of like 5 years ago. I never intentionally meant to start modeling. I was, I think it was it was a hobby alongside my university course. And I sort of started building a portfolio. I rather enjoyed it. And then it became a career, sort of off the back of me just kind of bombing around in my little Hyundai and building a portfolio with all these different photographers, you included. And the influencing stuff sort of built up alongside it. The more of the portfolio I built, the more images I had, therefore the more content I had that I could post online. So that's how I kind of got to where I am now.
And you ended up being signed by BMA, I believe. How did that come about?
So I sort of, that's actually one of the crucial elements of social media that I was really pleased with. I applied. I wouldn't say, well, I sort of, I basically applied to a competition that they were running called Pick Me BMA, and I won. And I became, they signed me onto them as an influencer, but I'm still also, but the modeling thing was kind of took a back seat. They said we weren't 100% sure. They weren't 100% sure if they could get me work as a model because of my height and because of my size. So they signed me as an influencer, but nevertheless, they've still been getting me work as a model. So yeah, that was one of the great parts of social media. I'm not sure I would have been signed otherwise.
Your height? What's wrong with your height?
I'm 5'5", and their minimum requirements are 5'7" to 8.
Because you can super tell in photos for sure.
Well, this is one of the things. This is one of my big sort of like gripes with the whole height standard. Like exactly that. It's like you can't even tell. You can't tell in commercials. You can't tell in e-com. You can't tell in campaigns. But for some reason, it is still a massive like pointer. Whenever, like, one of the reasons I've not been signed by a few other agencies abroad is literally because I don't reach that standard. It's really, really frustrating.
I think what would happen is you would get signed and it would be like, see, height's not a problem. But then your first job would be to stand next to a measuring stick and it would just all go out the window. You'd be in trouble.
Like, no, but it's like, she's absolutely perfect. Oh, no. Oh, that's a tragedy. Immediately. Like, although we needed like the face, that face would be perfect, but it's just the height. You fell short quite literally. So
how much did modeling sort of differ from what you expected when you came into it to what it actually is?
I guess it's like the thing with anything, you see the sort of, I guess the portrayal of what modeling is, you know, it's very tall, very slim models, the kind of people that walk catwalks at New York Fashion Week. And you kind of assume that is the only like brand of modeling that you can get into. And then you get into it and you realize there's obviously all these different arenas and all these different spheres that you can get involved with. And curve modeling, to be honest, wasn't big on the scene as far as I was aware. When I sort of came into it, there was a few sort of like curve bloggers. There was a few curve models like dotted around the world, but none that were really, really massive at the time. Now it's kind of, the scene has exploded to the point where it almost feels, it's very normal. So I guess I was definitely expecting to be doing a lot more catwalks.
Right.
You see loads of catwalks. You think, oh, catwalks, that's just it, right? It's just catwalks. No, it completely took me by surprise, the amount of like the different areas that they need models for. I mean, I've modeled for some really bizarre stuff. I modeled for literal, like it was what looked like a grass, but it was cut into the shape of a human, and you could take it out into the middle of the city and you could lie it on the pavement, and that would be your own little patch of like countryside in the city. I literally can't even I'm going to have to send it to you after this. It's the maddest thing I've ever done. But things like that.
I mean, right now, in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, it sounds like that's what people should be carrying around with them, so that they're allowed to have their own patch of grass, but not share it with anyone else.
Actually, that's the thing. It's like almost like they predicted it. It's like it was just before its time. That's all.
Conspiracy theory.
Exactly.
So moving on from modeling, then obviously the role of an influencer is something that I've pretty much spent about 4 years trying to work out what the fuck is going on with it. So if you can explain to me as best as anyone can what the role and the point of an influencer is, and what the difference is between a model and an influencer.
So the difference between a model and an influencer, I suppose the thing is nowadays you'll find that a lot of modeling actually kind of the line between modeling and influencing is becoming ever so much more blurred. And actually now it's a requirement by agencies for models to have a certain amount of followers. They have to have some online presence, which is, I mean, or at least it benefits them for sure. I mean, you could have an amazing face and no online presence, and you will be expected to get an Instagram account or a Facebook or whatever it is, a TikTok account now, isn't it? So I guess now I get like the role of a model in my view is to be the face or to be the physical kind of like maybe entity to a product. And then the influencing side is part of the marketing side of the product. So for me, when I'm a model and I turn up on set, my role is to be there as a sort of human kind of prop, essentially, to kind of sell a product. Whereas I guess that's the modeling side of it. Whereas the social media side, for me, it's kind of under my own steam and my own control. A brand will give me a product that I then have to kind of find ways to market it myself. So yeah, that's the difference. I would say the main difference is modeling is the human prop side. You don't really have any say in that process. Whereas the social media side, you have full say in that process. People hire you because you have a particular style or influence. I mean, literally influence, or, you know, maybe you have a certain like demographic of followers and that's what they hire you for. That's what they want.
So being an influencer is more creative than being a model.
I would say definitely, yeah. Yes, it is. Because, well, for me, in my personal experience, when it comes to modeling, I will, I'll turn up on set and everything's down to the director or, you know, the sort of stylist and the production assistants. That whatever they want from that picture, that's what I have to put up with. If I don't like the makeup, that's really not down to me. Unless it's a specific kind of, you know, there are some campaigns where you can do that and you do have a little bit of a say, but most of the time not really. Whereas with the social media side, I have pretty much complete control. Like they'll give me a pair of trousers and then I have to find my own unique way of styling those trousers. I mean, or in my case, lingerie most of the time. But yeah, that's essentially how it's spun.
And something that I think is not talked about anywhere nearly enough is the sort of ethical responsibility of product promotion and being an influencer. I remember going back a few years when Fit Tea was a thing and the girls were going around pretending that they really enjoyed having diarrhea as a way of losing weight. What should, in your opinion, obviously, but what should influencers be doing ethically when it comes to sort of product promotion?
I think at the moment, so we've there's definitely been like a massive sort of come down. Like if you post a product now, you have to by law obviously put these things like hashtags and whatnot, or at the beginning you put things like there's something up the top which says paid partnership. Instagram's pretty good at flagging when what you're doing is a sort of like paid promotion. It's so it's the partnership between the influencer and the brand. That's a really crucial point. So the brand have to stress to the influencer that it is crucial that they let people know that this is a paid promotion, that this is something that they are being paid to promote. But also, as for example, from my own personal perspective, I try to only I only promote things that I would personally use or wear. One of the things that I don't particularly like is that I've seen a lot of influencers, and there was a particular video that came out recently of an influencer. I'm not quite sure who it was, but it's out there on the internet, basically saying that she didn't use the product. I believe it was some sort of, as you say, like a fit tea thing. And she was sort of saying, oh, like, I mean, I don't use it, but who cares, right? It's, I'll just say I do. And it's money. And it was this kind of like, if she was being filmed in a kind of lighthearted meeting, it was quite insidious. So I think it's important on the behalf of the influencer to, I mean, like, really try to it's not a requirement, but I would say it's best in terms of ethics to maybe stick to promoting things that you would personally use, because the difference between an influencer and, like, say a normal commercial ad or whatever, is that an influencer, the way that you're selling things to people is you're using your very own brand, like you're being pitched as a relatable character online. And therefore, I think that there should be more ethics involved in how you sell things to your followers, your demographic, particularly when it comes to, like, my sort of account, which is very focused on body confidence, or, kind of trying to sort of speak to my followers in a more personal way. I try to make sure that I would only talk about products that I would actually use. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it does. I think it comes across as if it's brands are monetizing the trust you have from your following.
Yes.
And obviously if you breach that trust, then that's where it becomes unethical.
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. You put it, you say things so much more like fluidly than I do, but that's essentially it. And I think, like, that's where it becomes my responsibility then to make sure that I'm not taking advantage to the point. I mean, because I'm not saying my followers are stupid. I don't think that for a minute. As long as I sort of do say this is a paid partnership, I don't think that they're gonna, they're not all kind of puppy dog eyes and idiots. But I think that it's just having that aspect of, I'm not going to abuse your trust by I'm not going to start selling, I don't know, Slim Fast. I've been asked to do numerous different Slim Fast campaigns and like Botox ads and whatnot. And that's where you have to start to sort of be careful. And also the other thing is, if you start selling those sorts of things, your reputation and, their trust in you definitely diminishes very, very quickly. So you've got to be clever about how you do things. But yeah, it is important not to take advantage in that way.
Well, you touched upon body positivity, body confidence just there. For people that don't know, which I can't imagine there's many, but I like to make sure that all bases are kind of covered. What is the sort of body positivity movement?
So the body positivity movement, I think currently there are different spheres of it, and there's a lot of online debate with regards to body confidence and body positivity, fat acceptance, this sort of thing. So body positivity revolves around the idea that it originated in the 1970s in New York, and there was a group of self sort of like they called themselves like sort of fat activists, and their idea was that they wanted to be seen equally within society and not discriminate. Sorry, my brain's moving very quickly and my mouth is not keeping up. So they wanted to be seen as equals within society, not discriminated against down due to their weight. The body confidence sort of sector online, which is what a lot of people will see on social media, is basically kind of the normalization of the human body, the normalization of the female body. I have not seen a lot of men within the movement. I've not seen a lot of male representation within the movement. So it's basically, the normalization of the human body and talking openly about the human body's like functions and dysfunctions and cellulite and that sort of thing, wrinkles and all the stuff that the human body naturally does, the stuff that we don't usually see reflected in modern day marketing and technology.
Why do you think it's not represented particularly highly by men?
I think it's because do you know what? It's an interesting question. I used to think that it was because men didn't have as much of an issue with their bodies as necessarily women. But I think it's actually because they just there's not a lot of men out there that feel particularly confident in coming out and talking about their insecurities with regards to their bodies. I think it varies from person to person, obviously. I'm not speaking about them as, as a whole, but it's, I think it's generally because a lot of them don't feel super comfortable about coming out and saying, hey, I don't care about the spots on my ass. And, I don't care about my, male pattern baldness. A lot of them just they don't really want to come out and talk about that, So I think that is how I feel about it at the moment. But yeah, I'm not sure as a whole.
I certainly think it's reflected in the way that people discuss the differences between men and women now. In this, obviously, like you just said, there's no all. We're not speaking about an entire group or anything like that. But in generalities, I think that it's much more acceptable for me to go online and post about a guy being fat, a guy being bald, a guy having spots or having, whatever wrong with him, or even as something as incredibly pathetic as talking about like penis size. It's all of those things are sort of socially acceptable to bring up publicly and mock someone over, a lot more so than bringing up any problems with a female. One thing that I have noticed and a point of contention for me with the body positivity movement is sometimes it feels like some of the ambassadors like to promote negative actions from a positive movement. So they'll make comments about people that are skinny or people that have, have some of those normative qualities that have been, perceived to be accepted for a lot longer. There seems to be a movement of a very small minority of people that want to go and tell women to eat a sandwich or get some meat on her bones, things like that. How do you sort of feel about people that turn a positive movement into a negative?
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's really frustrating. And I think this happens a lot in large scale movements. You obviously have that sort of minority of people that will then turn that movement into something else. And unfortunately, that can often become the front runner of that movement when actually the majority of people understand that all bodies are real bodies. I mean, you see this all the time. Like you said, real women have meat on their bones, real women have curves, all this kind of stuff. It's like there are no qualifiers to what constitutes as a real human body. Like real human bodies are like real human bodies. There's absolutely and I can't stand this sort of superiority complex when it comes to what constitutes as the best kind of body. That's the exact opposite of what the movement is supposed to be about. Is about putting qualifiers on what it means to have a body that's worthy of attention from anyone is completely bullshit. The whole point is that it's teaching people to come to accept their bodies, whether that's neutrally or positively, and not having their bodies be the main central focus of like their everyday activities. Of course, that is something that I talk about a lot online, but my main concern is just to try and get people to stop allowing that being the thing that takes front and center every single day, if that makes sense. Like I'm just trying to kind of normalize people's bodies in a way that they can accept them. But yeah, no, sorry, with regards to your question, it's really, really frustrating, and I absolutely do not in any way encourage it. I really, really hate it. And I have talked about it quite a lot, especially recently, because my following's been growing and there have been more and more people coming in and saying, you're the example of what a real woman looks like. And I'm like, I don't even know what that really fucking means. Like that's real women and real men are real women and real men. It's ridiculous.
I mean, something that's kind of often pinned to body positivity is the sexual preferences of people being important to how they look. So with regards to like the real women have meat on their bones, there's quite often the sort of the prefix to that, which is that men prefer women with meat on their bones. Comments like that where it's there's almost like the value of what you are as a person is pinned to your sexual proclivity, I guess, or the amount of people that are after you in a sense of sexual attraction. How do you balance something like the difference between people's right to preference when it comes to their sexual preference, what people find attractive, but also controlling the self-esteem of a larger group?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question, and I hope I answer it well. So I think with regards to preference, I always support the view that preference is completely down to the individual. And like when it comes to, I know what you mean in terms of like, there may be, there's this idea that beauty, there's a certain type of beauty that is very, very kind of like that is chased by everyone, and then you have like the kind of normative population. I think that preference, again, like I can never speak for like, this is what you should like, this is what you should find attractive, because I would never ever expect anyone to say that to me. Like I would never want anyone to like try and control what I find attractive. What I find attractive as I've gotten older has definitely expanded, but it doesn't mean that like I would still want anyone to try and step in and say, this is what you should find attractive, and if you don't find this type of person attractive, that makes you, you're discriminating against that person. I think that it's, oh gosh, I'm trying to answer it well. So you said, how do you like this? The second part of your question I'm struggling with. So it's
how do you balance the difference between people's right to preference, but also controlling a general self-esteem?
So yeah, I mean, it's everyone has their right to preference. However, I do understand that there are people out there that will find it difficult because the general preference tends to focus on a specific standards of beauty, and that can be very frustrating. I think the whole wider point of my journey on like body positivity or to educate people is to also try and expand their view on what beauty actually looks like. I know that obviously there's a lot of argument for what people naturally find attractive, what people's natural preferences are when it comes to beauty. But I hope that as this body positivity movement grows and as the body confidence movement grows, and it becomes, because at the moment it's in its infancy and it's not a particularly, I wouldn't say it's the most sophisticated like movement yet, but I think as time goes on and as people start to become a bit more comfortable with it and start to kind of find their feet with it, we can start to actually try and expand people's view of what conventional beauty looks like, and therefore maybe kind of again expand, like get people to sort of look at what beauty is in a different way. I hope that makes sense. Like it's just trying to kind of grow the body positivity movement in a way that means that people will start to expand their points of view in terms of like what they find attractive and what they don't. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I mean, the one thing I've always found quite interesting is that there is an idea that the standards that have been set up are something that have been set up by sort of the everyday man, and women have to adhere to it. And I understand, I think because we've talked at length before, I don't need to clarify that I do know my stuff when it comes to the history of human interaction to an extent. It's not my first day. But the idea that the magazine covers that are decided by like Vogue or Harper's Bazaar or Cosmopolitan are a bunch of plumbers and builders sat around deciding how women should look is obviously absolutely ridiculous. And it's something I think the body positivity movement could really do with revising. This idea that men sit around and demand that women look a certain way, the average man is just honestly absolutely ridiculous at this point, and constantly taxing people of this generation for the sins of people from hundreds of years ago or even 50 years ago is just daft. I think if a movement wants to move forward, it has to adapt to what it has in front of them and fix what's in front of them. We can't fix the past. You can't stick 6 million Germans on a train and it just makes what happens in the 40s okay. It's about addressing what's in front of us. And I do think that one thing that drives me absolutely mad is that the idea that the average guy on the street is the person that is deciding what's on the front of magazine covers, which therefore is inhibiting every woman's opinion of themselves and affecting their self-esteem. That's the one thing that I do find constantly kind of bugs me.
Cumbersome, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I would definitely, were you finished or did I just completely cut across you then?
No, you're all good. You go for it.
I was going to say, yeah, I think one of the things, especially coming into the industry and being more kind of involved with it, you do start to sort of see that a lot of the structures, especially within magazines, I mean, magazines still have a huge influence, but particularly, you know, I mean, they've just moved online now, that, you know, a lot of these teams are teams of women. And I mean, like, I think in my kind of like definitely in my journey through this industry, I think that of course, like, I think like conventional beauty standards are reinforced by both, like, you know, like both men and women. And when people talk about patriarchy, I think that there is often a very kind of like, there's a lot of like, you know, the hackles go, is it the hackles go up, or the heckles, I can't remember the word. Like, you know, and everyone gets very kind of like awkward. But actually, like when I say patriarchy, I think within that, there is a lot of reinforcement from women, that there is a certain type of beauty that people have to adhere to. I mean, a lot of these teams that I've worked with are women, and they are still there. You know, there is a lot of responsibility there on the side of women, in regards to like setting these very, very these sort of like peripheral standards that absolutely do not like not everyone can reach. So I completely agree with you. I think the frustration when it comes to the average Joe, as you were just mentioning, was that, you know, they're kind of, I think a lot of the time they seem to be the kind of front runners for the frustration, because they are the ones that, for example, they're the ones that come into my inbox, and they're the ones that are sending me sort of like the dick pics and whatnot. But it's actually like sort of, it's not necessarily them that are kind of like setting these standards, if that makes sense. So it's interesting, because I remember when we had our last conversation, it's just funny because time moves fairly quickly, and I think attitudes shift, and I have learned a great deal. And it's just like, you know, especially about this industry, about where these standards are actually coming from. And yeah, it would be unwise to focus all my energy just on that one place, because as I said, a lot of these teams I work with are women. So.
Well, I think quite often that the comparison is wrong in terms of how men are treated and how women are treated, in the sense that I think we compare the wrong subjects. So if you compare women's beauty standards to men's beauty standards, it's a non-competition. But there's a pretty good reason for that, and that's money. Money creates competition, and that creates an imbalance in, you know, men aren't selling beauty products based on competing against other men. That's not how we do it. It doesn't speak to the general populace male psyche. Whereas with women, a lot of the beauty and fashion side of things, to me, is very much competitive. I mean, I don't think it's just me. If you see a film like Neon Demon, anything that's kind of a darker look at the fashion world, it's very much about the competition between women within the fashion or beauty industries. And that can be down to consumerism, the competition to be able to buy the most expensive of a particular product that will somehow elevate you above another woman that can't afford it or can't get hold of it or whatever. And I actually think if you compare the female beauty industry to male sport industry, it actually makes more sense, because what it is a lot of gatekeepers making a lot of money out of the competitive element between men. And I think that that's where the beauty industry is with women. I think it's about, I don't want to use the word too lightly, but I think it's definitely about some competitive element between women in probably quite a carnal sense. Is quite easy to monetize, because if you get one woman to compete against the other and the winner is the one who spends the most money, then the person who's selling the product wins. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it completely does. And I've never actually heard it being compared between beauty and sport. And I think you're right. I think a lot of the time is very focused on what matters, you know, what matters to that particular gender. And then, you know, to women, often it's beauty. And I think that's often like kind of set in this idea that, you know, the woman who attracts the most, because I think a lot of the time, I know that you mentioned, you know, you don't want to necessarily reflect on things that happened 50 years ago, but I still think there's this entrenched notion of whoever's the most beautiful, you know, it gets the best man, and, you know, the man who is the best at sport is the strongest, the fastest, you know, the best. But I love this idea of like comparing, because you're absolutely right. Beauty, just like beauty and sport are much better ways of actually kind of is a kind of litmus test between what actually matters to both genders. I think that's completely right.
That's the last time I'm going to jump in with any opinions because this isn't about me. One thing I do want to ask you is about I've got this written down in my notes as literally just 2 words, and I don't really know how to approach the subject, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And this is all off the cuff because I've got to try and make this as polite as possible. What do you make of this sort of uprise of OnlyFans and the popularity of people making money through sites like OnlyFans?
I fully encourage it. I think this is the thing. I think it's a conversation I've had recently with a couple of people, and there's definitely been a lot of debate on it, particularly in the kind of freelance photography world that I've seen going on online. I personally don't take issue with it. I think if women, I'm assuming we're talking about women more because they're the more popular sort of people that are on there. I've seen a lot of models doing it as well. I think that if that's something, if they want to capitalize on their sexuality, then do it. Like at the end of the day, there are lots of people out there who are sending nudes for free and getting absolutely nothing in return. Whereas if you can get paid for your nude, like why not? I don't take issue with OnlyFans. Like I really think that ultimately it's quite a wise move to capitalize on the fact that you, at the end of the day, there are girls on there who are making like £1,000 a day, and they're absolutely at the end, there are people who can criticize them, but they're making a lot of money. Now, whether or not it's beneficial for them in the future, or whether having an OnlyFans is going to affect their work, that's really down to them. That's like the beauty of autonomy. I just don't have I just don't see a problem with it. To me, it's the same. I support sex workers in pretty much any category, so I'm okay with OnlyFans.
Is there a danger with selling sexualization? Is there a danger that you're making yourself a product?
I think it's, I don't have an OnlyFans. And I think, again, it's that thing of understanding that women aren't I don't want to generalize that you are suggesting we're talking about women, but I kind of assume you are.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, that's fine then. So women are not, there's a word my brain is trying to reach. We're not like a monolithic group. So in regards to product, if one woman, or if however many women want to start kind of making themselves into products for the benefit of selling their nudes to men online, that's absolutely down to them. But all I ask of people who see it is to understand that doesn't necessarily mean that every single woman is then falls victim to that the actions of these particular women. I fully support their decision, but that's their decision. I personally don't have an OnlyFans because brands don't tend to like it, and that is literally probably the only reason I don't have one. But yeah, that's all I would say to people, is just try to understand that, of course, I understand that people might see it that way, but ultimately we're not all one group. So
yeah, a lot of the comparisons I've heard with OnlyFans obviously is kind of similar to what you're saying. The way I do kind of see it is, it reminds me a little bit of the way that we sort of reference bankers. And when we talk about bankers, we're generally talking about the ones in the late 80s, early 90s that were complete dicks, that, they were testosterone filled arseholes that caused so many problems. And, they were doing what they were doing to make money, and that, that's not always a good justification for people. And I do agree with the freedom movement. I personally couldn't care less about OnlyFans. If we could move as much of the tasteless stuff off of Instagram and onto paid forums, and I'd be fine with that because it means that I can open my phone when I'm out in public and not have someone who I know who's just decided to start OnlyFans showing something that I really don't want to be on my phone. That's the side of it. I mean, that's the old school prude in me that's not really a big fan of opening my phone to see someone's asshole, but I'll probably just move on because that's such an eloquent quote to finish on. I'll probably just leave that there. I want to ask you something that I think is probably quite important, but maybe something you haven't been asked, but you're going to tell me that you have been asked loads of times before. Is there a danger to a person's psyche given social media opens us up to such a, when I say us, I mean you, opens you up to such a huge volume of compliments? Can that be damaging in a narcissistic sense?
Absolutely, 100%. I really truly believe that because I've given some extended thought, particularly on. I nearly lost my Instagram. I think I want to say back in around August time, and it gave me real pause for thought on what kind of person would I be if all of the compliments and all of the kind of comments and all the likes suddenly got taken away, because we are suddenly living in this. I've thought about this so much, and I do have a lot to say on it. It's such a complicated and such an interesting issue because we've never had this level of adoration at our fingertips before. I mean, sure, celebrities did used to, but they were like 1 in a million. Now everyone can open themselves up to this level of adoration, and it can develop a generation of potential, fairly, I wouldn't say, I think the narcissism aspect is definitely there, but I would say more vanity, and it also creates major insecurity because it also the criticism is so little that it stands out so much more. And we all, I definitely have thought to myself before, what would I, how would I be without all of this interaction, without all of these people coming in and telling me, and complimenting me? At the end of the day, I'm a human being. I'm not going to I'm not going to beat myself up for, sort of enjoying it, but simultaneously I have thought to myself, how would I be if I didn't have all of this, if I didn't have this kind of attention? And I hope sincerely that I would still be okay. I mean, a big part of the social media life that I have is that it is my job. It's really crucial to me because I earn money through it. But I think if my world suddenly went quiet in that sense, I have considered how would I react? I'd like to think I'd be okay. But who knows? Who really knows? So yeah, I do think it's a big problem. I think it's something that it needs to be reflected on more. It needs to be more kind of pushed into people's psyches. Have you considered how you'd feel without this? Are you self-aware enough to live and be healthy enough without all of these compliments and without all of these people around you constantly telling you every day how great you are, how inspiring you are, how beautiful you are? Because you need to make sure that you are getting those things from alternative resources outside of social media. Otherwise, you will not have a fulfilling life. What if your account suddenly gets deleted? That's your entire, adoration network gone down. Are you going to be okay without that? So it's a tough question, but it is one that I definitely have given some thought. And I think you're right. It's something we need to think about more.
I think like a lot of men, I take a lot of what I know about women, which is incredibly small. What I don't know about women could fill a warehouse. But what I do know about women from my wife is that I think women are much more attuned to bullshit. And I think they are much more switched on. And they are also much better at hiding how attuned to bullshit they are. And one thing that concerns me and intrigues me quite a bit is there is, I would say from my experience, a vast amount of this within the modeling community of false praise, and a lot of people that will throw the most absolutely nonsensically overhyped compliments at each other online. And I think the breaking point for me, and I might be wrong here, but I think the breaking point for me is when I see people reposting compliments, like retweeting them or adding compliments to their Instagram stories, where it starts to become incestuous, where it's like, well, if you put something on my feed and I can post that publicly, then I'll put something on your feed and you can post that publicly. And then everyone can see how much we're liked. And then the people that follow us will see that we reshare compliments. So they'll share. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily a positive movement in the sense of we're all being nice to each other, because it comes with a veiled layer of people being mutually beneficial from dishonesty, if that makes any sense.
Well, of course it does. And yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of this. Like when people tag me on, like basically they'll repost a post, they'll tag me and then they'll write something about how, they found my post inspiring. The reason I actually repost those posts is because it encourages people to repost my work. And if I reblog them, then that kind of, you see what I'm saying? I think it's more of I would say it's more of a business strategy. I know that sounds a little bit dishonest, but it genuinely is like more of a kind of trying to like generate conversation around that post I just made. But I think
there is one difference with you, though. There is one difference with you and with a few other people, within the sense of whether or not I agree with you 100% on anything, or whether or not me and you would end up at the same viewpoint. The difference is that you are actively interested in self-esteem and the self-esteem movement. Therefore, you reposting something that is about a positive comment from one person to another that is in the interest of generating self-esteem could be perceived as being beneficial to just an overall understanding of that movement, and you're encouraging a certain type of behavior. Whereas I do think in most cases, these are people that aren't actively interested in other people's self-esteem. They're just interested in creating a market for their own.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It's a very, I think possibly because the self-esteem, like I like my work is within the self-esteem category. I completely agree. That is another reason I do it as well. I think it is. I think the other thing is that when you talked about narcissism, when you talked about this kind of idea of social media becoming this hub of compliments and niceties, that actually, like, when they get taken away, you start to realize like how authentic all of that was. And it really does take it pulls the rug out from underneath you. I've known some influencers who have had their accounts deleted, and of course, before that, with their 100,000 followers, they would have compliments galore and DMs and direct messages telling them how great they were. And then once those accounts were gone, I mean, of course, to a degree, their followers would have just lost them, but they said, the emails stopped coming in, the compliments, the kindness, once your number rating goes down on Instagram, then your value is also attached to that. And how worthy you are of being like treated well is also drops. It's like a Black Mirror episode, and it is quite scary. Well, it's not quite scary. It's really scary. And the thing is that, I mean, this is now transferred over to TikTok now, where kids of very, very young kids are doing this. So yeah, it's just this constant, like, I know what you mean. It's this constant like mudslinging, but in a kind of, of like glitter and pink and, oh my God, I love you, it's amazing. And it can feel very, it can feel very galling and very sort of unnerving, how sort of over the top it is off most of the time.
Something that I've always admired about you, and obviously we've known each other for a few years, but now you're a celebrity, you don't talk to me anymore. But all the time we have spoken to each other, you've been very open to having a difference of an opinion, which is actually quite rare these days. People don't like to hear the other side of what's going on. I'm certainly in disagreement with certain things that you say. You are certainly in disagreement with certain things that I say, but we listen to each other. What's happened with that? Why don't people want to hear the other side? Why don't people want to hear the opposite of their own opinion? And do you think it's particularly important to expose yourself to alternative views?
Yeah, I'm absolutely of this opinion that it's absolutely crucial, because it's going to prepare you for genuinely like interesting intellectual debate. The other thing is that I think that people I think that social media is a big part of this, right? So you have your hub, and you create you like pages, and you create an algorithm that basically feeds into your idea that you are right, and that you have the right idea, and all your friends have the right idea, and everyone else is wrong. So when somebody dares to step into your bubble and maybe introduce the idea that you aren't right, it can feel really like it's really anger inducing and galling and annoying. Because you have built this idea in your head, and you've solidified this idea that you are right. And to have someone come in and tell you you're not is really, really annoying. It's really, really frustrating. Nobody likes to be criticized. I actively seek alternative opinions, because the way I, for example, the way I speak to you, the way I have talk to other people, would never have got off the ground if I was just constantly exposing myself to the same opinion over and over and over. I mean, I have learned, just because it goes against what I believe, I'll always listen to it, because it might not be that I agree with that entire thing, but there's going to be a host of other things that I might learn from that particular person. And I think the value of open debate, particularly in the way that you and I conduct our conversations, or the way I listen to podcasts with people I don't necessarily agree with, from the absolutely mad, like InfoWars Alex Jones, exactly, yeah, to the incredibly kind of liberal. I mean, obviously Alex Jones is extreme end, and then you listen to the very, very liberal. For example, one I listen to is Sophie Hagen, and it's just absorbing all of these points of view and then coming down either at neutral or, having at least an informed opinion on that topic. Because truly, I don't really understand why you'd want to, other than because your own ego is telling you otherwise. Why would you not want to know more about everything? And everyone has differing opinions. There might be something that I'm really interested in, and somebody might come in and say, have you seen it from this? Have you considered it from this perspective before? And I haven't.
I completely agree with the fact that it's important to kind of, I think it's almost, you have to sanitize your opinions against the opinions of others, and whatever doesn't hold true against something else. If you listen to someone else and you learn something, and that affects the way that you think about the things that you thought you knew about before that conversation, well, what you've done is you've cleaned away some of the bullshit that you didn't realize that you were kind of putting out there. You didn't actually believe something as much as what you did, or now that you have new information, you can adjust. I think people are just scared of adjusting. We're in a quote obsessed day where people all want to have the caption on their Instagram, or they want to be the person that puts something out there that makes other people quote it and share it and make other people aware that they said it. There's almost an intellectual pat on the back to being the person that said something that other people agree with. And when you create an echo chamber, it's very easy to do that because everyone's already of that mindset. So really, it's just the loudest person in the echo chamber will always feel like they're the smartest. But in fact, if you talk to someone that has a completely differing opinion to yours, it's much more interesting, because it's frightening, because things that you would absolutely have bet your house on will change over time. No doubt. Your opinions change over time, even if you don't expose them to other people. But also, you can just use the opportunity to learn about the motivation of someone that thinks differently. So two people can be absolutely right thinking the complete opposite thing because they're thinking about it from a different motivation. That's what's been lost in all of this, is that two people can disagree on something and both be right.
And it's exactly what you said as well about that echo chamber aspect, that bit about where, you say a thing, and then, but what you're saying is as exactly as you just said, the most sanitized version of whatever it is you're saying. And then of course you're going to get loads of praise for that because it's the most sanitized version. It's easy to say. Mm. And the people that I admire, or the people that at the very least, the ones that will go out on a limb and say something controversial. I mean, at that moment in time, it may not be the most popular opinion, but it may end up changing I've seen the most incredible people online who have said something, and then at first everyone sort of is very angry, they take the piss, or that, and then eventually they come around to that way of thinking. I've seen some really, really interesting evolutions of certain podcasters and on public figures online, who started out with a really controversial opinion that then people came around to. But of course, people are going to people do oppose, but you have to be prepared for that. At the end of the day, I think just have it. If you have a strong enough chest to take criticism, that's absolutely crucial. And ultimately, you're just this kind of like jelly-like flip-floppy type public figure. I mean, in the past, I've said some really I know I still do just very boring things, just very like middle of the road statements, because I've just not felt like I just don't want to get criticized that day. I just don't want people to, have a go at me. But it's all about just kind of, you have to be open to other people's perspectives. I really do believe that. Otherwise, you're just not going to learn anything. And it's so boring living in an echo chamber. It really is.
Well, I really like Tom Segura's idea for how you deal with when you have a massive disagreement with somebody over something political or anything like that, and you're in like a family setting or you're just out with friends and you say something. So you could say like, oh, I think this is a really good idea. And then the other person goes, oh, I completely disagree. And you go, do you know what? You just flipped me. I'm on your side now. And that just confuses everybody, because what they want a lot of the time is they actually want that conflict. And if you just take away the conflict, you're like, okay, fine. I agree with you then. We'll just go from there. People get upset because they don't have the conflict. They're not necessarily bothered about changing your opinion. They want the conflict.
Yeah, they do. If I said something, yeah, exactly. If I said something and then you suddenly went like, oh yeah, okay, I agree with you. I'd go, oh, okay, okay, people actually enjoy it. It would actually throw me off for you to suddenly go, oh yeah, no, you're right. Like, you're absolutely right about that thing. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, there's actually a great set on sketch online of a woman who goes into a shop to complain, and the shop assistant says, no, you're absolutely right. Here's a refund, and also, we'll here's your next offer on the house. And she sort of pauses and says, actually, I was really looking for a fight. She's like, oh, okay. And they have a fight in the middle of the shop. But I completely agree with you. Yeah, people do actually, they do want a little bit of that. They do want a little bit of conflict and debate.
So let's move away from all these touchy subjects that people are already riled up about and calling me a twat in the comments. What's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you on a photo shoot?
Oh my God, funniest thing that's ever happened to me on a photo shoot. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think. Oh my God, you're going to have to do so much editing on this bit because there's going to be a massive silent gap, just like where Jess is just like, oh, I don't know.
I'll do a flatline noise.
I did have a photographer once. I mean, this isn't particularly hilarious, but I suppose, it was pretty bizarre. I did have a photographer once. I think I told you about this. I was in a child's park with a bunch of kids running around. And the photographer insisted, because he didn't have a reflector, he said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top of this child slide and I'm going to bend down. And I mean, his jeans were really tight, so that looked really weird. All these kiddies running around. And he said, if you could just lie on the slide, on my front, and sort of like do one of those very kind of, the poses where you put your palms together and then lay your head on your palms, the one, the really old school. Yep. He had me do that.
Biblical sleeping.
Yeah. He had me doing that on a child slide to use the kind of like metal as the reflector while he stood at the top, and all these kids were lining up behind him waiting to go down the slide, and it just wouldn't move for a good 2 minutes, but that's enough. Do you know what I mean? Before the parents started coming over and saying like, do you mind? Do you mind moving your model?
I think any photo shoot story that starts with "we were in a child's park" is always going to be a winner.
I really wish that's the sort of question that you just think like, God, I know that numerous weird shits happen to me on photo shoots, but everything from funny, creepy. I mean, I'd say that was a pretty weird, that was a pretty weird one.
Going back if you were to go back to the start, I think you said about 5.5 years, and give yourself a piece of advice about what's kind of coming, in the sense, obviously you'd warn them about not eating bats and coronavirus and whatnot, but what would you warn yourself about the future of modeling and what you should be prepared for?
one of the things I've learned in maybe in the last year, and the thing I kind of wish I'd known before, was there's this sort of atmosphere of over friendliness within the modeling community, the fashion community, and the beauty community. And it feels like there's an erosion of business. Everyone's become a little bit too chummy and, huggy and, babes, most people, a lot of brands and a lot of businesses that I speak to now, they kind of refer to me by like pet names and nicknames, which I find very strange and galling. So one of the things I would say is try not to get caught up in that, and remember that it's all business, and don't allow yourself to stagnate just based on the fact that you feel like you should remain loyal to certain brands and certain businesses, if that makes sense. I think there was quite a fairly long sort of like 2.5 year period of my sort of 5-year career where I sort of stayed stagnant because I was concerned about offending people because they kind of came off as my friends, when in actuality they are just businesses. And I try and keep a much more business-like approach to my clients and to my agency now, as opposed to before, where I was very kind of, I was a bit too close, a bit too friendly. Like that's from a personal perspective. But in regards to the modeling community as a whole, I'm not sure. Is there anything that you can think of?
Well, do you know what? I always think it's an interesting question to follow that up with, and it probably will help you a little bit with your way of thinking on this. If you weren't paid ever again to model, would you continue to do it?
I probably would continue to do it, but maybe not on the scale that I'm doing it now. But yeah, I really do love doing it. There's a performative element to it that I really enjoy, and I always have enjoyed. And like the first year I was doing it, I did it for free. So yeah, I would still do it.
Because I think it's one of those jobs. There's a few, I think, like being a professional footballer for little boys, being a model, or being a celebrity, or I think they're now saying that the first thing, the like number one aspiration of kids at school is to be like famous. Essentially, it's just to be a celebrity. So let's say to be a celebrity in some sense. There's this idea that it's such an amazing thing to be that you would do it no matter what, no matter how difficult it was, no matter how little money you made from it, you would give anything to kind of reach that point. Whereas in actual fact, when you get there, I think you realize that there are a lot of people, it's a career, it's a job. And in some cases, it's not one that they particularly enjoy. And if it wasn't as profitable, they just wouldn't touch. And I think that's something that surprises quite a few people when it comes to modeling, especially, is that there are quite a few women that model. And I'm saying women because men are very different in the modeling community generally. But there are quite a few women in the modeling community that it's a job, and when they're done with it, they're done with it. They don't want nothing to do with it. They don't do any extracurricular time with it. The second the job's done, they go home, they don't discuss it. And if it doesn't make them money, they don't do it. I think that's been quite the surprising thing I've learned over the last few years.
It's a really good point. And it's also one that it's interesting because you were sort of saying about, there's this build up to modeling as though it is the dream job for any, woman to have. And it's the career. If you make it as a model, then that sort of like that puts you at the kind of like precipice of like, like in terms of careers. If you make it in that, then you've made it. But I think it's like I was going back to earlier. There's lots of different areas of modeling, and also I think that I personally do enjoy it, but I think it's really insidious, this whole aspect of, it is the dream career, and putting it on this pedestal in the way that people do, because what happens is you end up with a load of people that want to do it so much that they will not allow themselves, because obviously this is completely, this shouldn't happen, but they are exploited within an inch of their lives. And particularly women, young models who desperately want to be models, who will, sit in dark stairwells for hours waiting for casting agents to return, and they won't eat, and they won't eat proper meals, and they'll pay for things out of pocket, or they'll get their parents to kind of like, drum up the money for these portfolios, and they'll get into mad debt. And I mean, there's a great book called I think it's called like the Model Manifesto, an anti-exploitation guide from A to Z. And it's just all the pointers and how to avoid being exploited in this industry. Because of course you can be exploited in any industry, but in this industry it's so rife. And one of the problems with creating this real kind of buzz around having a job like this one is that you end up thinking that it is so good that you're willing to give up your dignity, your, like huge sums of money, and you fall for anything. It's really, really dangerous in that sense.
I agree. I think any dream job, and I mean, like, there's only a few of these really, any sort of long-term, across the board, sort of vast majority of people would understand why it's a dream job. Anything like that, there's going to be a group of people that want to exploit it and a lot of people that will absolutely take everything they can from you to sell you the idea that they're going to get you there.
I think the reason modeling has been sort of placed on this idea, I mean, I'm not necessarily modeling, but celebrity or whatever, it's this idea that, those people are the best at what they do. They're the best in terms of creativity, in terms of being the prettiest, the strongest, the fittest, and all this sort of thing. But when you actually get there, it's like you say, it is genuinely a job. And it's one that requires, like it just requires sort of business savvy and some, intelligence, but it's a difficult job to maintain as well. I think that's the problem. It's when you're on the job, it's not necessarily the most difficult job in the world. There are difficulties, but it's not the most difficult job in the world. The most difficult part of being a model or being in a job like that is actually maintaining that job. It's often down to you to make sure that you are keeping your clients and making sure that everything's clear cut and going well, if that makes sense.
When you get approached, and I'm assuming you probably do, but when you get approached by young women that are looking to get into modeling, do you encourage it or discourage it?
So this is such a good question. And it's one that obviously it happens a lot. And obviously I'm not going to go on their profile and tell them whether or not they are worthy of pursuing a job like that, because that's not my place. They might have something to offer that so if they want to be a model, like I'm happy to give them advice, or at least but the other thing that, because I got the question so much, I opened up an FAQ and I put it on there. So I sort of direct them there. And I think, if they're willing to kind of pursue that branch of, if that's what they want to do, then here is a sort of step-by-step on how I did it. And whether or not they end up doing it is really down to them. And it's something that I'm not going to say, no, don't pursue it. It's not worth it, because it's not it's not my place to put them off modeling or put them onto it. I just kind of say, right, well, here's how I did it. If you're willing to kind of put the work in, this is what it takes. And it does take time. But I'm not going to simultaneously, I'm not going to hail it as the absolute only option. Maybe that person, what they really want is to have a following of some kind, which is often what they actually want to do. They often want to have some sort of following, as you sort of mentioned earlier, have that kind of status of, maybe kind of celebrity status or influencer status or whatever. And in a lot of cases, I've seen some great accounts. Maybe I'll say to them, well, what do you really want to do? Like, what's your passions? I like being a vet. It's like, okay, well, be a vet and then, create a following out of that. Anyway, back to your question. No, I don't discourage it, but, I'm not going to turn them away. So I give them kind of the steps to do it. But whether or not they actually do it is down to them. And I'm completely honest, I don't think a lot of them do. I think a lot of them want a magic sort of pill, if that makes sense. I mean, I've noticed, I got one on Purple Port the other day, which doesn't happen too often. And they don't even get back to me a lot of the time, because I think what they're hoping for is some quick stick, a quick fire way of doing it. They want, how do you be a model? You take this magic pill and it happens. Okay, great, thanks. Actually, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and I don't think they're expecting that.
No, that's quite common. People want to have the quickest route to their dream. And the thing is, like you said about not holding people's hands through it, and letting them find their own ways, I think it's a real disservice to people if you do hold their hand too much through the early stages of something, because when you let go and life hits them, the hard time hits them, they're not going to be prepared for it at all. And it's probably going to hit them 10 times harder than it would if they'd have just learnt the ropes themselves.
Absolutely. No, completely agree. I do try to, like, I mean, that's the thing. I like, I've considered getting like a mentor recently, you know, someone who like is kind of doing what I want to do in the future, and then kind of like, you know, taking advice from them. But I always think that like, it's always worth doing things by yourself, because once if you learn that and you get that experience, it's so beneficial later on. Because when you're handed something, it can blow up in your face. You don't expect the hardships that come with it when you eventually are on your own, and you will be. So
what are you doing to stay sane during this wonderful lockdown period?
So I've got a few, like, you know, that bullshit. People are like, well, man, if only I had the time. I was like, I literally like, I think I wrote something the other day, like, I guess I can't lie to myself about all the shit I do if I had the time. So like, because I've been, the thing is, when it first started, I thought to myself, do you know what? I'm going to take some time to really focus on me, whatever that means. And turns out focusing on me was just fucking doing absolutely nothing, which was fine for, you know, a week and a half. And then you sort of think, do you know what? I think I actually need a little bit of structure. So I sort of wrote down everything, and I'm doing things that I always kind of wanted to do. Like, I'm building a website. I'm also building, I'm sort of looking into building like a union for influencers, because one doesn't exist yet. Which is just a place where people can go to kind of, because you've got the actors union, you've got models union. It's just a place for people to go where they can, you know, have discussions about brands and, you know, payment and whatnot, and how not to be exploited, because it's quite like rife within the community is to be exploited by brands. And so projects like that. I'm also writing a lot. I've got a couple of sort of, one's a sort of passion novel, the other one's a kind of novel I'm actually hoping might get published, who knows. So yeah, just writing, creating stuff on, yeah, like creating websites, not creating websites, you know, using Squarespace. I'm not a website coder. And yeah, just kind of doing stuff that I always intended on doing when I didn't have the time when I was working. So yeah, just I am staying sane. I am.
With all due respect, I completely understand the irony of what I'm about to say, but if I could ask you to help people find you online, being obviously a much smaller fish in that pond, I feel kind of ridiculous asking people that are so much more, let's say famous, just to annoy you, people that are so much more famous than me, where they can find you online. So what are your social media links and so on?
You can find me pretty much anywhere, just typing in Jess Megan. Like, I mean, on Instagram, it's Jess _Megan_. TikTok, it's Jessica Megan or Jess Megan. And yeah, you can find me that way on Twitter, Facebook as well. And I will soon have my own website, which I hope kind of boosts my professionalism in some way. But yeah, that's how you find me on pretty much any platform.
I've never really understood how many models don't have websites. I've always thought it was really bizarre for someone that's trying to build up a personal brand to not have a website at all. But I guess I'm just very old school and I don't really understand the world anymore. I'm just the angry old man shaking his fist at a cloud at this point, I think.
I love that. I just love that image of you shaking your fist at a cloud. It's so like, but this is the thing. I can't believe I never had one. It's just a completely bizarre thing. I guess it's genuinely lack of discipline. That's the only excuse I have, just lack of discipline. I just thought, well, you know, if they want to look at my work, they can just go to Purple Paw, and that's not obviously a good enough place to go anymore. And or if they want it, they can go to my agency website, which doesn't get updated regularly enough. So now I'm like, well, if I had my own website, I can put everything on there. It's all under my own steam. And yeah, that I can maybe even start doing mailing lists and so on. It just seems mad that I haven't done it before.
Well, Jessica, it's been absolutely wonderful to have you on. That's the only time in history I've ever called you Jessica, and I'm going to stick to it. It's been wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much for your insights. I'd just like to say that it's always fun to have a conversation with someone who enjoys the same memes as me. So anytime I have the opportunity to talk to you, I always will. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Kris. It's good to talk to you.